everyone. I'm very excited to introduce you to this event with our partner, Women of 21st Century, aka W21. Agora Art and Women of the 21st Century are joining forces to produce a new curators conversation that map feminism practice across art, science, culture, and technology. We are joined by two of their founders, Valeria Fashin, Delani Linden, and Indrani Saha. Tonight we are very honored to have a fantastic panel, but before we jump into the discussion, I will leave the floor to Delani to tell us a little bit more about W21's mission as well as methodology. Delani, I leave you the floor.
Yeah, I'll just say you touched on it a little bit, but I'll reiterate. So my name is Delani Linden, and I'll tell you a little bit about our project, W21. So it's a curatorial collective and ongoing research project focusing on post-feminist and intersectional practices in art, science, and technology. Our project aims to challenge the never-evolving nature of the archive and its fixed, discriminating taxonomy. So how do we do this? W21 gathers data through a crowdsourcing method. Each year, we distribute a questionnaire centered around a theme. This year's theme is disembodiment. In doing so, we build an archive of women artists and scientists and technologists talking about their methods, practices, and interests, and from there, we build clusters around certain keywords. Through our interviews of women who come from all backgrounds, our primary goal is to showcase the plurality of feminism. So our idea is that there is not just one definition of feminism. While our project is in its early phase, we just launched in February and we have recently taken on new people. We're very excited about that. We ultimately plan to use keywords from the interviews to link women together using a neural networking system. So I will tell you a little bit about our founders. Valeria, who's here today, is a producer and researcher with a focus on visual studies, biology, and AI. Her work explores the relationship between bodies, technologies, and future ecosystems. She holds an MA in the history of art and an MA in curatorial museum studies from the Courtauld Institute of Art. She is currently working as a project manager and assistant curator at the Fiorucci Art Trust in London. Indrani, who is unable to be here today, but she is a doctoral candidate in history, theory, and criticism of art and architectural program at MIT. She studies modern art of the United States, and she has a particular interest in histories of abstraction as they intersect with theories of the mind, histories of spirituality, and reception theory. She holds a BA in cognitive aesthetics and from Duke, where she was Mellon May's undergraduate fellow. And about myself, I am a doctoral candidate at MIT studying the historical intersections of color, chemistry, and optics in early 19th century French art. My background is in neuroscience and art history, similar to Indrani. Great, Valeria, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you everyone for being here tonight. Tonight we will be in conversation with Margot Mottaz, Wilhelmina, Madeley, and Zaiba Jabbar about the speakers. Zaiba is an award-winning director, independent curator, and founder of Her Visions. With over a decade of experience in the film and media sectors, her curatorial practice is an investigation into how people in the margins are using technology to create art outside of traditional contexts and making space for themselves in the digital environment. Her Vision is a them-focused curatorial agency supporting and promoting artists working across new and emerging technologies and platforms with a strong focus on the intersection of art, technology, and culture. Previous exhibitions and partners include Lux, Tate, Arabyte, Bitforms, and Google Arts and Culture. Wilhelmina has worked in the visual arts for over a decade, with some of the industry's most notable names including Damien Hirst, Frieze, and Michael Werner Gallery. She has recently left her position at Acute Art, an art and technology company specializing in VR and AR as head of exhibitions, to join the team of the Modern House. Willow has been a moderator and speaker at events including the New Art World Conference 2020 and Aesthetica Art Prize 2020. She's also a guest lecturer at the Royal College of Art and a mentor at I Like Networking. Margot is the associate curator at Superblue, based in the London office. She joined the company in its infancy to support the COO and the senior curator with fostering artist relations and developing curatorial strategies for Superblue centers. Margot works closely with artists and special projects and represents their interests across departments, ensuring their vision is fulfilled in all exhibitions and displays. She also leads significant institutional and corporate partnership with a focus on new artwork commissions. The title of tonight's event is 3 Degrees of Separation from Real to Virtual Spaces. The title was very much inspired by the theory of 6 degrees of separation, the idea that all people are 6 or fewer social connections away from each other. We wanted to apply this theory in order to understand what are the relations between real, mixed, and virtual realities. But most of all, 6 degrees of separation is one of the main theories on which the W21 neural research system is based. Margot, Superblue recently opened in Miami and is representing artists that work with the concept of immersivity from Team Lab to James Starrell. And Willow, you have been working on this head of exhibition at Acute Art and have been exploring the concept of space in between what is real and what is virtual with AR works from the most prominent contemporary artists. And Zaiba, you are one of the most leading voices in the industry, and your recent exhibition, Disembodied Behaviors, created together with Valeria Mend at Big Forms Gallery, explored the concept of disembodiment and its multifaceted aspect in the virtual realm. So my first question for you will be, what is the relationship between real and virtual? Margot, would you like to start?
Sure. Hi, everyone, and thank you so much to Agora and W21 for having us this evening. It's nice to see some new and familiar names in the audience today. Yeah, I think I'll start by just saying, Superblue is a quite recently launched company that's dedicated to experiential art. And by that, we really mean art in real spaces that you experience with your whole body and that you walk into and that you immerse yourself in some way or another, and that you really interact with and participate in. So I think for me, this question about real and virtual space is an interesting one. In a way, they're the same. I see it as being one big universe, especially now where technologies are, we often hear new technologies, and in truth, they're not new anymore. We live with them every day. We're completely, absorbed by them. And a lot of the content that we experience and that we see, we mediate or distill through our technologies and through our phones and images. So I think it's interesting to think about them as one universe, and it's really about how you can create extensions into the virtual that you couldn't do in physical spaces. And that's where I think there's a really interesting conversation happening at the moment around, you go into a physical experience and how do you recreate a genuine and authentic experience online for people, be it, on a website, on an app, through imagery. I think that's where COVID has been really fascinating too. Obviously, it's, we all felt it. We all went into these kind of Zoom meetings and other forms of virtual interactions. And in the gallery world, at least in the museum world, we've seen a lot of sort of online viewing rooms and people trying to replicate what happens in real life into virtual spaces. And that for me is sort of missing an opportunity. I think there's so much interest in trying to extend things rather than trying to recreate. So really pushing boundaries and finding ways to use virtual technologies to make spaces that are not sort of defined or constrained by physical spaces themselves. So I'll leave it at that because I'm curious to hear what Willow and Zaiba have to say.
Oh, thanks, Margot. Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with this idea about it's, an extension, I guess, of them being the same, and that you shouldn't really see them as different. I'm really obsessed with the AFK term that Legacy Russell uses a lot, this kind of away from keyboard term, which is, this kind of hybrid evolved I guess existence. There is no definition between the digital and the real world anymore. It's really hard to untangle those two notions. And I really like that idea of, like, I kind of say this thing called imploded presence, this idea of how we're sort of manifesting this like rhetorical vocalization of desires, of connection, when, in an age when we're sort of losing place, essentially, because we are in no one place, we are sort of in multiple places at the same time. And so, yeah, it's really hard to kind of, I guess, define what is, virtual and what is real. And I think with what I try to do, I think, with her visions is really about kind of gaining exposure, obviously, for like the people or the artists that I work with, so marginalized groups of people. And it's, really about trying to find new spaces as well around that. So this kind of like hybrid sort of materiality, I think, that the digital offers, and the opportunity of I guess how the devices and this whole idea of techne as well, this kind of philosophy of making as well, I think is really how that's integrated into art now, with the sort of evolution of social, like an influence of social media spaces as well, I think is, this kind of this sort of mutual conversation that we're all having. And I guess we're going to go into a bit more about that, about the performance of this that we kind of are all engaging in, and this kind of collective understanding or sort of I guess kind of discourse that we're all trying to create around these spaces as well. So, there's a lot of different things that are kind of affecting these spaces. But yeah, I think, for me, like, I think the virtual and real, I think are pretty much the same thing too.
I'm going to be really boring and say I also agree. I think that the real and the virtual, they kind of constitute each other. There is such a strong relationship between both, and one doesn't really exist without the other in a certain way, certainly if we're talking about the present. I think to sort of bring my own experience into this, and my experience of these worlds is practical rather than theoretical. And what I would say is something really fascinating happened when I was head of exhibitions at Acute is we used to focus predominantly on VR, which is completely immersive, and arguably the body disappears when you're in VR, but we can talk about that later. When the company pivoted to AR, I think we really saw our audience expand, and things really started to take off. I think a lot of that is to do with the fact that the virtual at that point could then sort of permeate those geographical boundaries. So it meant that people could experience AR simultaneously. It didn't matter where they were, who they were. They could all experience it as one, which I found to be incredibly powerful, actually, and this really interesting, new, innovative way to experience art. But also, I think what's interesting about that is that to view AR, you need a tool, like a real physical screen, mostly in the form of a smartphone. So your whole experience is like through this screen and through this interface. So when I talk about like the relationship constituting each other, I think that's kind of what I mean. And then you get into this like really interesting argument about, well, who made those tools? And is that actually, is that broadening your audience and your demographic if you have to own a smartphone in order to experience this art? And I'm not going to digress too much because otherwise I'll get super political and, we'll talk about neoliberalism, whatever. But I was very interested in the idea that the virtual could sort of permeate boundaries that maybe the real couldn't, like time zones, like geography. So I'll probably just leave it there. Otherwise I'm going to digress hugely, I think.
No, but I think it actually, a super interesting point, because what we're trying to do at W21 is to provide, a spectrum of feminism. Like, what we keep saying is that, you need to see feminism as, to its full extent. And in a way, reality is the same thing. You can go through the reality, of a 3D to the virtual spaces in which, in a way, they have, you have multi-spaces, you can experiment with virtuality as much as you want. So you can create your body, you can create your reality, you can create your own rules. So in a way, I think, what you just said, Willow, was incredibly powerful to me. I mean, do you think that by us using virtualities or this sort of technologies in a way is kind of stretching or making even more powerful certain Western way of looking at realities?
Ooh, what a question. Is it making it more powerful realities? I think we need to think about what the lens is through which we look at these artworks and through which we look at sort of experience, you know, in regards to experiencing art through new technologies, who is making these new technologies? You know, and I think that it's difficult to disentangle those two things. Yeah, I think that definitely kind of like understanding and questioning that lens is absolutely vital. I also think that sometimes with new technologies, particularly with AR, sometimes it can seem like you're whispering to your cat, which is something that I definitely experienced when I was with the company. If people don't know that you've got this incredible, you know, radical app out there, then like how much impact does it actually make in actuality? So I think like number one, it's the lens and the platforms through which you use. Are they problematic in themselves? But number two, it's like, how do you actually make sure it's going to the kind of audience that you're going to impact in the first place?
Thank you, Willow. Zaiba, Margot, what do you think about this? Is it possible to make technologies less Western in a way?
What a challenge. I think it's very true, and we have to be quite careful. And I think for me, we've talked a lot about it. At Superblue, obviously, we work with quite, you know, custom technologies and in real spaces, but obviously we are very acutely aware of how we need to start integrating virtual technologies into what we do. And for us, it comes from audience first, in a way of thinking, if someone can't visit one of our physical spaces, can they have an experience of what we do online, you know, across time zones at any point? And VR always comes up as, you know, the perfect immersive technology. Like if you're in a physical space immersed, you know, why VR seems like such an obvious step. But to come back to what Willow was saying, we have that kind of barrier with VR because you have to have that headset, and it's already such a price point to acquire that. So it isn't democratic at all. You're just really catering to a quite small portion of people who are, you know, can buy a headset and who have the interest. So it's a very small portion of people. And then AR, of course, has the same issue. I mean, you're relying on people having smartphones, and indeed, you are still limited by where that wealth is, where that kind of technology is created, where it emerges from. But I think it's about finding ways to break that down or be more inclusive in what you show, what you create, what you produce, and trying to kind of, yeah, break these boundaries down of affording artists the opportunity to create these works too. Because a lot of people who have the resources to create, you know, works with new technologies or very like custom technologies, that also comes at a price. It's not that simple, you know, you need kind of an infrastructure. So it's about creating systems and infrastructures in the art world and beyond, to be honest, that allow that kind of support for artists of all types.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, you know, accessibility obviously is a really huge point of discussion, and I think, but if you compare that to maybe how many people might just have access to a gallery or go to a museum or something like that, I think the sort of the opportunity that these kind of technologies can offer, I think, you know, is something to actually be quite, I guess is also a powerful thing. I think, you know, it's funny how like most of us do have smartphones, I guess, in the Western world. But yeah, I'm always, yeah, I mean, there's a real tension between these, you know, and controversy around, you know, these techno-capitalist companies that are, you know, creating these tools or accessibility. I mean, especially Wilhelmina, you mentioned about the augmented reality, and obviously I find this specifically like really interesting, this kind of new medium, or how it's become a sort of discipline in its own right with its own kind of aesthetic language, because it actually integrates the person into that art. So if you're looking at how, there is this facade of creativity, but then also there is alongside that, data capture, colony that kind of exists around, if you're looking at augmented reality made through, say, Instagram or Snapchat, for example. But I think, that's sort of like, it does, the fact that it is accessible, it's an accessible tool. I think, and that sort of interactivity of how users or consumers can become the art themselves, I think, is really, it is a really powerful tool as well. So it's not just passive, it's actually really participatory as well. So I think that's kind of, I guess, leading on to, again, this kind of idea of performance in the digital space. But I struggle with this tension a lot because there's a lot to be said about sort of like motives of these things as well.
Thank you so much, Zaiba. Actually, our second question is related to the concept of disembodiment, which is W21's theme for 2021. So virtual spaces, they offer a possibility to let go of predefined preconception. So while stretching the concept of the biological body in virtual space, we can experience a new type of freedom. In this regard, how can the body perform and be represented in this constantly changing yet interdependent spaces? Is the way we perform in these spaces changing? Shall we start from Zaiba this time?
Is it changing? I mean, undoubtedly so, I think. I think just going back to, I guess, some of the points about, this sort of not being able to really differentiate between the real and the virtual anymore. So there is no doubt that the sort of performance within these spaces has become, it's one and the same thing, and it's also not it's also, I guess, changing how we interact in our real lives as well. I mean, I guess from like a Her Vision's point of view, just like a couple of a recent project that I did with Lux, Out of Touch, when we was looking at touch in the digital space, and how does that kind of idea how do these sort of new semantics of touch evolve when we're thinking about how COVID has completely accelerated sort of the digital language and our digital understanding of how we interact and how we touch, essentially. Like one of the projects that I worked on with Libby Heaney, which was called Touch as a Responsibility, which was a site-specific interactive animation, where the participants' touch was used in stories in Instagram. And this idea of, because she kind of works with she's a quantum physicist and an artist, she basically created this work where the beginning and it's all about how, and it's actually from the image that we're using to promote the today's talk as well. So how the machine sees performance in the digital space. So there's kind of these extracted stills of how this AI reads performance, and also how AI reads the female form, essentially, based on, I guess, Western aesthetics. So this idea, these, representations of biases can be also seen. So I feel like, that was a really interesting project, because it's, it is highlighting these biases as well. So I feel like even though we're becoming more aware of them, we're still in a way perpetuating it as well. So it's kind of, I feel like, we're still kind of going into this, I don't know, kind of strange, kind of hybrid, feeding the machine performance of the machine, but then also we are sort of aware of it as well, whereas maybe before we wasn't so aware of it.
Willow, do you want to go next?
Sure. I'm going to use some practical examples of some things that I think really relate to this question. I don't know if any of you guys saw a piece that Acute made by Anthony Gormley. It was called Lunatic. And basically it was a journey to the moon. And what was kind of slightly odd, but also fascinating about this piece was the fact that despite Gormley arguably interested in being interested in the body in space, there was no body in this artwork. So you were completely invisible, completely disembodied and disentangled from the self, I think. And the journey was so incredibly physical if you experienced it. So you were launched from this island and you were placed on the moon, and then a lot of the experience kind of centered around bouncing on top of the moon, and you were supposed to feel the same physical sensations as like the same gravitational pull as you would if you were on the moon yourself. What happened is, to a lot of the people in the audience, is they became so disorientated by this particular experience because they didn't have a body and they couldn't see themselves, but they could physically feel things happening inside their own bodies. So when you were pushing the controller downwards to bounce on the moon, you could feel your stomach flipping. And that was actually like, yeah, it was quite disconcerting actually to feel something, but not to be able to see something. And quite a few people fell over. And I think also like what we had to do to kind of counteract that experience was a lot of people had to sit down, but then that kind of, I think, diluted a lot of the experience. So I think sometimes when it comes to the body and disembodying the body, a lot of the responsibility comes to the artist and like the experience of the artist themselves. I think this was a whole new territory for Gormley, and maybe he would have thought about it in a very different way. But I was really experiencing like the physical sensations that didn't link up to sight, and how, you know, that sort of disconnection. The other thing I always think about when I think of sort of like disembodied bodies in VR is the other bodies that we encounter. So like the other virtual bodies and the other characters, and like also issues of consent. Again, not to kind of digress too much, but if you're encountering bodies where you feel something physical whilst you're in the virtual space, like, is that okay? Is it okay for artists to do that and to explore that, and for you to not necessarily be consenting because you don't know what you're about to view? So a good example of that is if you've ever seen Jordan Wolfson's piece, which is incredibly violent. I think like the reason why that piece was so powerful is not just because of the violence that ensued, but because you were unaware of what was going to happen and how you were physically going to react to it. And I think him starting the whole piece upside down, where you had to physically hold on to something, like really created that like physical anxiety in the body before you then had to kind of like witness this violence. Another really good example of like disembodied bodies is the artist Rachel Rossin. She created this VR piece called Man Mask. And what she did is she hacked the game Call of Duty, and she created these like fragmented soldier bodies that kind of like drifted through space. And I thought that was amazing because it was almost like disentangling masculinity, or I think that was what it was supposed to do. It was taking something that was supposed to be quite violent and destructive and making it into this kind of like quite ephemeral, odd, very beautiful experience. So I could talk about this subject continuously because I think that we can view it from so many different perspectives and through so many different artworks. But I think another thing, just to kind of like finish this off, is something that I also experienced was, I don't know if any of you have seen Laurie Anderson's work, where you also travel to the moon. And something that I loved about that piece is like, there's a part where you inhabit a creature and you can see your hands. So when you're moving the controllers, you can see yourself. And I loved inhabiting this sort of mystical creature that I had no context for. And actually, I felt that I felt much more kind of held by the artist. I felt like I was being taken on this like miraculous journey, as opposed to just being like thrown into something super disconcerting like I did maybe with Gormley and Wolfson. So it's interesting to see how different artists kind of approach the physical body in their like virtual spaces.
Margot.
Sure. And I can vouch for the lunatic experience with Gormley's VR project, which was really, really surprising to experience, as you were saying, Willow, of this very physical experience, but you don't, your body's not there. So I really, I second that entirely. I think I'm going to flip this around a little bit because I'm the one here who comes from these physical experiences. But we opened one of our first art centers in Miami last week with 3 very large-scale immersive experiences. And actually, when we were creating that show, we thought a lot about re-embodiment almost, and regaining awareness of your body in space and where it belongs and how you interact with others in a physical space. And that was before COVID even happened, to be honest. But we were thinking about, always being these avatars online and all these experiences trying to take your body away from you. And how does it feel to be back in a real space and really think about where you are and how you physically react to something. And we did that, the 3 experiences we have in this space. It's a 50,000 square feet warehouse. So it's really a huge, huge space. And it's divided in sort of 3 exhibition rooms. And the first is pieces by Team Lab, which are a Japanese collective I'm sure many of you are familiar with. And their artworks are these huge projections on the walls that you can touch and interact with. And as you kind of move around the space, they change. And as you move around the space and sort of impact these works, other people impact them as well. So you're really in this sort of cycle of your own body, changing what the artwork is and how it behaves. And other bodies around you are doing the same in real time. And it's all generated in real time. So there's no programming, sort of no pre-animation. So that's a first moment where you start realizing that, your body has an impact in the world and in that kind of space. And then you move on to Againstfeld by James Turrell, which is one of his iconic sort of room installations where light becomes matter. You just see light for what it is. It's not kind of revealing or illuminating anything. You're just in this kind of color and light field. And it's a completely different experience for your body. It's really kind of unsettling because you go from this very vibrant, colorful flowers, music, to this extremely quiet, almost like sort of spiritual space where it's sort of a meditation in a way. You walk in, it's very quiet, it's very silent, and you sort of spend 5-10 minutes in there, and everything is soothing. But it's also kind of disorienting because you can't see the borders of the walls, you can't see where kind of the exhibition space ends. So it's again a different kind of experience. And then you exit that space and you walk into S. Devlin's Mirror Maze, which is a kind of sort of eco work about the relationship between your lungs and trees outside. And again, you're in this maze, and so you're sort of disoriented, and your body is everything. And you walk out of these 3 exhibitions, and you've had such different sort of feelings and emotions throughout. And I think that's such an important moment as well now that we have to think about our bodies again and how they behave. And from that, you can then also try to find ways that online you can recreate these sensations. And to come back to VR and that kind of world, I experienced in London around the same time as the Gormley one, actually, a project by Marshmallow Laser Feast. It was at the Saatchi Gallery. And what they did is it was the opposite of what Gormley was. So you walked into this, and it was in VR, you walked into this forest, but you had sensors all over you. So it was measuring your pulse and your breath and your sort of hand movements. And you could see other people in real time in that VR experience. So you're actually quite embodied for a virtual space, and you could really see yourself breathing, you could see other people breathing, but we were sort of dots of color. So what's interesting in those things, I think, is that there's a degree of embodiment and a degree of you being present and other people being present. At the same time, a lot of what creates interactions between people is sort of micro movements and kind of, signifiers on your face or in your body language that I think is still completely lacking in virtual platforms at the moment. The connections are not quite the same. And I know that some big tech companies and social media companies are working on that specifically, on creating avatars, but that actually kind of capture your real face movements and translate that into these worlds to make it just a little bit more personable and a little bit more authentic. So I think that's my take on it. I think there's really still a big gap in that department, talking about the difference between real and virtual. I think that's where there's a huge separations in terms of how your body is and how you behave and how you translate real life exchanges into sort of disembodied forms.
Thank you so much, Margot. I would like to ask you another question just before to move to the last one and then opening the stage to the Q&A session. So do you think we really are cyborgs, and is that actually a positive thing? Because in a way, I'm trying to understand what is the relationship between the real and the sort of projection of the body, as an avatar. Is this something positive, or in a way, by forgetting about our biological body, are we making are we creating some problems, in regards to that? Is the mind the body, and how can we talk about that? Who starts? Margot?
Sure. What a question. That's a tough one, to be honest. I don't think we're cyborgs, and I don't think we'll ever be. I get a sense that, we are in our bodies, and our minds might be linked or not. Maybe it's something bigger. And I do believe that actually, that the mind is sort of something bigger. But I think we still have to live our everyday lives in the bodies that we're given. I think there's a lot of work to be done for all types of bodies to be recognized, and that's a whole separate conversation. And I think online avatars afford a freedom that is so great in many ways, and that allows people to explore the kind of spectrum on which they live and the differences they feel. But I also think there's a flip side to that. There always is a flip side, and you also get kind of the anonymous quality of online avatars, which can be dangerous and can be even, I think, more dangerous than in real life interactions in some ways. So yeah, I think it's about finding that balance. But I don't believe that we're sort of half human, half tech at this point. I think it's still things. It's just a platform to explore, and it's a different way of expressing who we are. I think all those personalities are within you, and you can express them in different ways. And the virtual world affords you some more freedom in that respect.
Willow, do you want to go next?
Oh man, this is so philosophical. I'm really interested in what Margot was saying actually about re-embodiment. I think that we are going to maybe reach, or this is what I hope anyway, some kind of Renaissance period when it comes to re-embodiment, because I think that we have spent, as Westerners, as people of privilege, we spent so much time looking at screens, experiencing the world digitally. I think now is the time where we realize that actually we need more physical time with others. There needs to be more physical togetherness, that we want to get back into our bodies, whether that's into the gym or into a gallery, that actually the digital sphere does not in any way, although it eclipses real life, I don't think it replaces it and that experience. And I think that actually we're going to see a real transition and maybe even a bit of resistance from the digital world, just because we've been so immersed in it for so long and we haven't really had the choice. I think with the avatar and the cyborg, I think avatars are still a way for us to escape, but we'll never fully escape our physicality. I think that it's way too early to say that we're cyborgs, but we're certainly influenced, I think, physically by the digital sphere. But even when we think about the digital, there's this amazing artist whose name I can't remember, but he was talking about the digital and how we actually experience it physically. And he wasn't even just talking about the body, he was talking about it through physical stuff. When we think about the digital world, it still involves cables and screens and monitors and all these things. And we say it's this kind of ephemeral cloud-like world, but it's not. And I think that we always need to relate the digital back to the physical. So no, not cyborgs yet. And hopefully, like I said, there'll be a resurgence of re-embodiment, as it were.
Yeah, I mean, I think the word cyborg is so loaded. It just, I mean, I think in my mind, I think, we have to sort of reimagine what that word actually means, really, I think, to how we exist on a day-to-day. I mean, like, how reliant are we on technology on a day-to-day? And how infused are we? Like our phones are essentially extensions of our hands, and our screens are like extensions of our eyes. So I feel like we, this sort of like traditional kind of understanding, which sounds like a weird sentence in itself, of cyborg or us living as cyborgs, is actually, I think how we are so interconnected with technology that it's just, I think for me, it feels like a sort of reimagining of what that word actually means. I don't think it's like we are in, a lot of what we, so much is informed now by, our sort of insight into data, and the data and is or data collection, or this sort of ritualized understanding or that of how we record things, and how this informs future decisions and choices. I think that's really interesting, and I think that's, for me, it's definitely, it's a very much it's a very sort of like, we have to have a very sort of broader understanding of what cyborg really means, and and how that sort of like translated, this I guess social, or the critique of like a social, and how our memory is like translated, and I think, for me, it's reimagining. So
I love that. Yeah, no, I do, because Heidegger was saying that technology is an extension of our body, and we need, in a way, to kind of accept the fact that our body is in constant flux. It's extending, and technology, we're humans, and if we think it about from a Darwinian perspective, which it's kind of very retrograde as well, but in a way, also animals, they use technologies to help themselves. So technology has a major impact on the way that we perceive reality, and also in the way that we shape reality. So I think the two things, from my personal point of view, they go together, they go in parallel, and you can't think about the body of a human body without thinking what's actually happening in technologies and science and synthetic biology. I think the two are incredibly interconnected. It's also a very uncanny reality, and of course that's as Willow was saying, that the consent of whenever we are doing something for virtual reality, that is something to consider. Luciano Floridi, he is a very important researcher on this, on the ethical aspects of AI, for example, and he's actually focusing on the point of, yes, what are the limits, to which extent we're going to say that this is okay, and then when we're going to say, oh, actually we're turning into cyborgs, we are accepting something that is not probably in the the natural biological rules. So I think it's an incredible and interesting point of view to consider. So I would like to finish with our last question from W21's question, before opening to the Q&A session. So what would you say to future generations of women? So shall we start with Willow?
I'm going to keep it short and sweet. I would say question everything. Usually if you have an instinct that something might be controversial or hurtful or has a potential to harm, that instinct is generally right. And I don't mean to say that in a sort of like overtly negative way, like watch your back, but I do think it's good to question. I do think it's good to always raise issues, and particularly if there aren't multiple voices in the room, perhaps to think about what they would say. And that's pretty controversial, because then you're speaking from others, and I can get into this like black hole. But question everything. Like I said, just make sure that you are including as many voices as possible.
Margot, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I would say, I completely agree with Willow. That is very true. I would add to that, build a community. Surround yourself with other women or people that, you can trust and that can support you. And I think that for me has been really important, having sort of mentors and friends and professional friends, in a sense, that I can rely on when in doubt, or, in all moments of life. So I think, surrounding yourself with people who are like-minded in your kind of industry, that's helped me a lot.
Oh, gosh, where do I start? I mean, gosh, it's a big question. I mean, I guess, it's like women or female identifying people, general, sort of advice. Yeah, I mean, these are all good points that the others have raised. I think, community building, looking for good role models. I mean, these things are all like really powerful and important. I think, like, personally, I would probably say, if it's not easy, then you're probably doing the right thing, basically, and because that's where you grow. So I think keep putting yourself in uncomfortable positions.
I like it. Well, thank you so much. No, honestly, I totally agree. Constantly, pushing yourself and questioning that, I think, it's a good point. Mm-hmm. So let's start with a Q&A. We have 2 questions for now. So the first is from Deepika, and she's asking, I was wondering if you could share any experiments with purely audio mediums to disseminate cultural content. Screen fatigue is one of the downsides of our increased reliance on the digital. Would love to know if and how you thought about this aspect of screen fatigue and engagement with audio while creating content for new audiences. Who starts first?
I mean, I don't mind. I mean, actually, I was just thinking about a project that I worked on with our bike gallery for a project that was called The Art of No Likes, and within that, it was kind of an evolving sort of curatorial project, looking at the sort of implications of standardizations within social media infrastructures. And we actually we did a performance which was called Haptic Paradigm, which was using like sort of the online space to generate compositions of created by interaction for the audience. And that was actually we had like a visual realm to it, but it was a sonic landscape and used as a live streamed sort of visual installation within the online space. And it had these kind of web tools that we could it was about exploring the ways in which we sort of remain in relationship to one another. So kind of being in isolation outside of immediate view. So this whole idea of, like, I guess, screen fatigue as well was kind of challenged within that space. And so you were able to manipulate this sort of the visual aspect through, the sound with these 2 sliders that so kind of manipulating the composition. So that might be an example, perhaps, which you can find still on the there's a sort of archived piece of performance on Arbite's website as well.
Margot.
So far, at least with Superblue, it's something that we've discussed but not truly created yet or developed yet. It's very frustrating because I'm bound to secrecy, but there is a project we're working on for later this summer to be in Miami that is a lot more about sound and sound performance than it is about visual media. As we're working with traditionally a musician who's created an experience where, your movements, your physical movements through the space impact sound basically around you. So there are definitely things we're thinking about. We're also thinking about extending, we're talking about before a little bit about how you extend experiences online. We have an app for our Superblue spaces, and we're thinking about creating content there that's, just audio, so trying to, that are linked to the exhibitions in some way, but don't exactly replicate it. So it's definitely on our minds, but I can't really say more now. So stay tuned.
I must confess, I don't have a very good answer for this. Whilst I was at Acute, it was definitely something we experienced. I think user experience was really, really challenging, actually. How do you communicate how to interact with an app and make sure the volume's on and make sure that people are picking up on the visual cues? That was one of the hardest things about my job, was actually making sure that people weren't just engaging, but having a really good experience engaging. And a lot of that, there had to be quite a big human factor to that, actually. So it's difficult for me to really talk about and consider. I definitely realized that if the piece, particularly in regards to AR, if there was an element of interaction, then engagement definitely increased. And I think that, I definitely think that those artworks that had a kind of interactive element did especially well. I think if it was just a sculpture popping up on a screen, it wasn't so sort of engaging and maybe even interesting. So I think seeing those digital artworks in a more sort of holistic way was the best approach. But it does come with its challenges. I mean, we had a lot of very clunky tutorials at the beginning of our app, being scan this, do this, and it's really difficult. And I feel almost relieved I don't have to deal with that anymore, because I don't think that there are a lot of solutions, and I actually think that the people coming up with solutions are genuinely so creative and brilliant, because they think about design in the macro, and that wasn't my background at all. So I don't know if this answered your question at all, but it's definitely something that I found challenging in my career in the past.
Let's move to the second question from Maya. So as digital curators, what do you think about inclusivity of digital immersive experiential art? On one hand, it expands the possibilities of engaging with art, but on the other hand, do you think it is possible to work towards making this kind of art available for people with some disabilities and certain conditions that make it hard for them to experience it? Margot? Sorry, I'm picking up on you.
No, that's fine. It's a really, really good question. And it's one that we ask ourselves every day. If I'm honest, we've made a lot of decisions in our space in Miami to make it as accessible as possible, but you're still in the world of visual arts, and that has barriers because, for people who are visually impaired, that's challenging. So it's something that we think about all the time. I don't have the perfect answer. I think for me, what I advocate for at Superblue and with the other curators and the team is, trying to make it as multisensory as possible. So if you're missing out on one aspect of it, you'll still get another. So I have been banging on about this, and if anyone from my team is on this call, they'll laugh, but scent. I just think there's so much to be done with scent in the world of experiential art. And some artists work with scent already, don't get me wrong. It's not like I've revolutionized this right now, but there is still so much to be done there. And I think between just engaging the senses more widely and creating spaces that are hot, that are cold, that smell different, where you have different sound effects, I just think there's so much potential there. So that's what I'm leaning towards and trying to find ways of, doing the best we can. I think there is no golden answer to this question. I'll give an example of an article you might want to read, it's quite interesting, or news rather. I know that the Toledo Art Museum in the US are now working in partnership with an organization dedicated to accessibility. And they've announced they're going to make that a full-time role in their museum next year to try to, answer these questions and find solutions. And I think that's really progressive, and it's very exciting to see. And I do hope that institutions, private or public around the world, will start, having these in-house roles of people whose job it is to figure out how we can make all of our spaces more accessible and, better experiences for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a lot of work to be done, I think, and that, if there is actually like a dedicated position, that would be amazing for someone who's actually thinking about, you know, these kind of problems. And yeah, I mean, yeah, it's like, how do you bring the art to people, you know, to everyone? And I think it's, you know, I think about this a lot, and I think about the fact that, you know, we have to have more, you know, unexpected ways, I guess, to experience art as well. I mean, I think with, like, when you think about, yeah, experiential art, obviously it's, you know, these things are like site specific, and if someone's in a wheelchair, and, you know, how, like, you know, how do we kind of you know, how do we tackle that? And I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I don't really have the answer yet, I don't think. And it's kind of, you know, I guess that's kind of this idea of, you know, bringing art to home, like all these kind of more, is it about more bespoke experiences that you can take to people as opposed to them going to it? And, you know, maybe there is this sort of like takeaway like that can be, you know, I guess pursued, so that, you know, you have like multiple iterations of an artwork that can be experienced in a multitude of ways. And I guess it is again like this kind of like multi-presence or multi-experience approach, you know, that it's like, it's not just this one thing, that like it's not just this kind of you're just going to you know, you're going to an immersive experience. It's like, how can that immersive experience be translated in other, you know, in other formats? So I mean, I think that's what, you know, that I guess there's the straightforward thing of someone doing like, oh, I've got like an online version, so obviously the whole sort of like, you know, the whole I guess explosion of like virtual galleries now is like is very, you know, apt in that sense. It's just the fact that but it's not that simple about, you know, translating a white cube space into a virtual space. You know, it's, you know, I think, yeah, there's a lot of work to be done. But yeah, I love the idea of like scent focused experience or multisensory experiences that can really enhance this sort of, you know, the presence or, you know, sort of embodiment within an artwork. So I feel, yeah, it's a very underdeveloped space, and I think, yeah, it would be good. Yeah, it'd be nice to see some further, you know, innovation in this area, I think. But yeah, that's just my 2 cents on it.
Yes, we have 3 last questions. I think we're running out of time, so we're going to try to be extremely quick. There was Margarita that indeed she was asking about synesthetic experiences. So in a way, I think we answered that about multisensory experiences and how they can be part of the experience. There's another question that I would like to ask you from Ida, who's asking, do you see a possibility with NFT and blockchain to validate VR as an art form?
Can I jump in on that one?
Go. I know you wanted. Go.
Validate, I think, is a very loaded word. I would never assume that money has to validate an artwork. That is like my own personal opinion. I do not speak on behalf of any other companies. Yeah, I think when it comes to buying and selling, though, if that's what you're talking about, does it? Maybe. I think that it's more a fact that collectors and the sort, you know, I don't want to just say artists, but the sort of people who are selling have managed to find a way to sell these artworks in a very effective, quite productive way. The irony about the sort of NFT boom, I'm sure most of you know this and understand this better than I do, is that actually like blockchain and the potential of NFTs is nothing new. I think what is new about it, and new to sort of this day and age, is that the comms around it and the kind of messaging completely changed. Because there was this great anecdote from somebody who was speaking on a podcast for the Art newspaper saying, like, we had this conference at Christie's 6 years ago about how blockchain could revolutionize VR and you could sell it. And collectors were like, what? And suddenly whoever it was went like very blockchain light on the whole thing. And then suddenly people were like, oh, it stops you from copying stuff. Great. And they like made it much more accessible in terms of like how you understand it. And then I think what was like extremely interesting about NFTs is that suddenly it was open to absolutely everyone, anyone interested in like finance, tech, art, anything could make an NFT and could be an artist in that context. Has it validated VR? The thing is with NFTs as well is there's a lot more admin when it comes to blockchain and VR, and a lot more admin than is necessary if you are only in NFTs to make money. So this is a very, very cynical response, but I sincerely doubt there's a huge future for it still, whilst there isn't a huge demand to experience VR. And one of the reasons why you can't experience VR in a kind of an effective way is because you can't experience it en masse. Whereas a lot of what, say, Margot is working with, you can experience all these artworks with the sense of togetherness, which I think is like very poignant to this whole discussion. So validate, no. Opening up a conversation, yes. Is there like this future for VR because of everything that's happened with NFTs and the blockchain? I sincerely doubt it. But then again, I could be completely wrong. I'm totally not an expert in this. But yeah, fascinating question. I think that's a great one to ask at the moment.
Shall we, Zaiba, do you have, okay.
I was just, I don't know how much more I have to really add to that, really. I mean, NFTs, the buzzword. I mean, I think we're talking about, like, not just VR, but I think digital art in you know, its most general state, really. I think, I guess this, the way that it's authenticated, in some sense, digital art, because, people can now monetize from it. And I think that's kind of like a strange thing in itself. I think, I guess it's this kind of untraditional sense or understanding of what art is, really. And I think it's giving value to it that is understood, to people that probably didn't understand that it's art or can't understand that it's art. So from that sort of, I guess, from that way that it's being able to be marketed in a different way, I think is, in some sense it is valid. I think that is a valid, like, newer sort of understanding of how we kind of, how, as I said, like, market these new sort of disciplines, even though like VR is not new, but I think it's just generally about sort of, actually understanding the value of digital art for new collectors, really. But I mean, I do actually think it can help, it's helping to be able to, it's helping for people to understand how can they own something that's immaterial, And I think that's what's really, that's what it does. It's like, okay, I actually have something that I can own, and like there's some sort of like, or some sort of ownership that sits around, I guess, how blockchain and NFTs are working. So for me, and we all want to be like, oh, like that's my gorgeous like painting on the wall or whatever. It's like this kind of understanding of art is obviously is so much simpler to understand. So I think these new understandings of how we kind of can own art is what it's doing, really. So I do think it's actually very valid.
Margot, what do you think, or shall we move to the next and last question?
I have a lot of thoughts about NFTs as well, but I think we'll move to the next question. It's not my expertise per se, but if you're interested, I have a colleague, and I'll give her a shout out, called Carlotta, and she is running an Instagram account called Blockchain What, and she answers many questions about what NFTs are, what they do, how you can make them better. So there we go. That's my contribution.
Thank you so much. So last question from Lorna. She's asking, where and how do you see this all intersecting with nature, natural, and biological, integrating these art forms into organic realms and also their environmental impacts? I would actually, love to add something on this. First, there's an artist that we're kind of aware, which is, Jakob Steensen. Margot, you're working with him. Also, whether you have been working with him with Acute. And he is, I think, a perfect example of that, because he has this incredible necessity and curiosity, to start from nature whenever he's replicating something in VR. So I think it is the perfect example of someone who's trying to integrate the real and the natural world. Another artist that comes to mind that I'm working with, it's Alexandra Daisy-Ginsburg and also Cecil Tolles. And in a way, these two artists also answers to the questions of Margarita asking about synesthetic experiences. For example, Cecil, she's working with the smell. And so she's trying to work on how do we connect emotions to the scent, and how we can replicate reality through that. So I think those two examples are incredibly, valuable. And Cecil, Alexandra, together with Christina Gapakis from Ginkgo Bioworks, have been presenting now at the Venice Biennale this room, basically, in which they were trying to recreate the sense of extincted species of flowers. So I think that is an incredible, example of how we can actually replicate nature through a synthetic biology. What do you think about this? I think this is a very valid question to try to say, how do we integrate, the sort of experience, which of course talks back to the fact that we need to have a multisensory experience, to the virtual. Margot, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. It's actually something that comes up a lot with the artists that we kind of work with within Superblue. There is really a sense of artists trying to sort of interpret or replicate natural phenomena with technologies, and they see it as a way to kind of, study and think about our sort of biophilic urges, I guess, this desire and need that humans have to be in nature and to feel it.
Ginkgo Bioworks have been presenting now at the Venice Biennale this room, basically, in which they were trying to recreate the sense of extincted species of flowers. So I think that is an incredible, example of how we can actually replicate nature through a synthetic biology. What do you think about this? I think this is a very valid question to try to say, how do we integrate, the sort of experience, which of course talks back to the fact that we need to have a multisensory experience, to the virtual. Margot, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. It's actually something that comes up a lot with the artists that we kind of work with within Superblue. There is really a sense of artists trying to sort of interpret or replicate natural phenomena with technologies, and they see it as a way to kind of, study and think about our sort of biophilic urges, I guess, this desire and need that humans have to be in nature and to feel it. And I think two examples of that, they're both Dutch, actually, which is interesting, but the first is Simon Heidens, and he's very well known for light weeds, which are basically digital projected plants that are generated through like digital seeds. So they kind of pollinate an area and they grow on facades of buildings, outdoor or indoor, according to actual sort of weather measurements. So, you know, they grow in real time with sunshine and rainfall, and they also sort of sway in the wind if it's a windy day. And if you walk past them, the seeds will sort of fall off the leaves and pollinate another area. So that's really a good example of someone who's, you know, using nature to recreate, you know, an artwork that's fully digital or sort of, you know, technological, I guess, and trying to sort of really bring that element back into a static environment. So you'll see them growing on cities, and his idea is to really think about bringing nature back into the built environment, and that kind of, you know, chance patterns and flux, that idea you get from nature that we don't have so much in very built environments anymore. So that's one example. A second is Drift. They're also Dutch. They're based in Amsterdam, and for them it's a little bit more tangential, but they're trying to sort of, you know, reconnect with nature through technology. And it's less that they're replicating things, it's more that they're interpreting it. So for instance, they have these beautiful hanging suspended works called meadows, which are these flowers that open and close, kind of choreographed to their environment, and they react. If you're under them, they'll open and close. So they kind of react to your body underneath. And they're looking at a phenomenon called nyctinasty, which is a natural phenomenon. A lot of flowers in your real life that close at night as a kind of defense mechanism and to preserve resources. So they're inspired very heavily by how nature behaves. And they often talk about, or they think about, what makes nature so special. Like, why is a breaking wave such a like beautiful moment? Why are these natural elements, you just never get bored of them, right? You can walk on a beach or walk in nature, and it's just, there's a sense of awe and a kind of sublime, I guess, that comes from it. And how can you use art to recreate those experiences? And technologies obviously allow that in a way that might not be possible with static mediums, just because you can create that interactivity and that kind of added element. So yeah, it's definitely something that's really at the forefront of a lot of artists' minds these days, and that, you know, you'll see a lot of with our Superblue projects.
Zaiba, do you have some thoughts?
Oh, sorry. I was just thinking about the work of just giving an example, I guess, of seeing where these kind of intersections are happening. Of Sophia Crespo, who uses, I guess it's kind of looking at like this kind of biology-inspired technologies using AI, sort of machine learning or neural networks to create sort of alternative sort of or to look at the sort of similarities between, I guess, the techniques of AI formation and biology. So yeah, if you check out some of her work, I think, you know, her whole kind of practice is looking at these sort of intersections, I think would be really insightful too.
Yeah, just to sort of add to that. So whilst I was at Acute, Oliver Eliasson did a series of works where he brought the natural world kind of into any environment that you were in. And actually that project called Wunderkammer, it launched at the very start of COVID, or very start of lockdown rather, in March last year. And I think a lot of the feelings behind, or a lot of the sort of philosophy behind that was that he wanted to bring the natural world and natural beauty into your own kind of indoor space during a time when you weren't really allowed to go outside, or you could go outside, you know, once a day for physical exercise. And not everyone lives in a beautiful place. Not everyone lives in the countryside or has access to outdoor space or the countryside, or a garden. So he took these natural objects like a rainbow, a rock that has a hole through, which is seen as like a very good omen and this kind of like a symbol of luck. He took this sun, which brings this like beautiful glow into your home, and actually those works were incredibly popular, which is, it's sort of quite humbling to know that actually people are still so fascinated and keen to engage with the natural world. So that was sort of like one ecologically driven project, and obviously Oliver Eliasson is a huge advocate against climate change and is very, very active in his own practice. But we were also working with an artist called Thomas Saraceno, who is an arachnophiliac, i.e. he absolutely loves and adores spiders. He is a huge advocate for spiders and being this really important creature within the ecosystem. And he talks a lot about, what happens if spiders, cease to exist, and how that impacts on the ecosystem, and thus how that impacts on our food sources, and then, how do we survive without spiders? And so his project sort of specifically engaged with spiders. He sort of took these spiders that he found really fascinating and he blew them up to be really, really large. And actually, I have a phobia with spiders, but because they were so just like ridiculously huge, actually I kind of engaged with how beautiful they were and their markings and how sort of like absurd the whole idea was. He also had a project, I don't know if maybe I can't actually talk about it. That's annoying. Anyway, he had this project where you were given a task and then maybe you were given something by Acute for doing the task that very much engaged with, I don't know if it's launched, that's why I was a bit like, which makes you engaged again with like the ecology and ecosystems of spiders. And I think spiders have obviously this reputation for being like dangerous and terrifying, when actually it's something like in the past, I can't remember how many years, it was like in 100 years, only like 10 people have ever died from a spider bite. That might be completely wrong, I'm sure it is, but it's something very, very small. And he was talking about how, spiders aren't as dangerous as they're perceived to be, and that we should be embracing them and fascinated by them. And I love that, he kind of like, I thought that was like a very powerful way to use new technologies. We don't live in a place with lots of spiders, thank goodness. But, at least he was kind of introducing these kind of like foreign creatures to people, no matter where they were. And I think it had this really like strong, but also quite like simple message that I'd at least not really thought about. And I thought that it brought this like sense of wider awareness. So I think, again, when we're relating back to the body, like if we can transcend those geographical boundaries when it comes to messaging, I think that these can be such an important tool, and they're probably not used enough. I'm going to caveat this with something like maybe a little bit more negative, which is to say, actually, a lot of these new technologies can have quite a detrimental effect on the environment, which I think is really worth saying. Particularly, there was so much rhetoric around that during the sort of NFT boom. Again, you could argue, well, maybe so does email, but I do think it's worth kind of like considering and discussing, because I think that some people dig themselves into a hole by saying that these new technologies are going to resolve climate change because then we don't have to travel or whatever. But actually, these things can also have an impact in the environment, and it's, I think, important to talk about.
Well, thank you so much for all of your amazing insights. I think it's been an incredible panel of 1.5 hours. It's more of what we planned for, but I think there was so much to say. And thank you for everyone also, to stay with us, for all of this long time. And I hope everyone enjoyed this panel as much as I did. So thank you again to Margot, Willow, and Zaiba for sharing their time with us and to share, their incredible ideas and expertise on this theme. So thank you also to Yummy for letting us organize this event. And I hope to see you soon on our next event for W21 in partnership with Agora Digital Art.
Thanks everybody.
Thanks
Take care.
Bye.
Thanks for coming, everyone. Bye.
Can't wait till we can do in-person events.
Oh no, thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Zaiba. Thank you so much.